I call the honourable member Dennis O'Rourke.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To say that the Royal Commission report into the Pike River coal mine tragedy is sobering is an understatement. This was the worst mining disaster in 96 years. 29 lives were lost, and it should not have happened in this day and age. It was a tragedy that should not have happened and which could have been prevented. So the question I ask, and the question which most New Zealanders will be asking today, is where does the responsibility lie? The Royal Commission found that the Department did not have the focus, capacity or strategies to ensure Pike River was meeting its responsibilities under health and safety law. Serious problems with the mine's ventilation and drainage systems were identified, and yet nothing was done. And permits were given without any real scrutiny of health and safety requirements. Now, the underlying reason for this shocking state of affairs, which I'm sad to say reveals New Zealand as a third world state as far as mine safety goes, is light-handed regulation and inadequate resources for the department, which lacked the necessary means to ensure safety at this mine and presumably at others. Every New Zealander should feel ashamed of government negligence on mine safety because, Mr Speaker, it is firstly and foremostly a government issue, and it is secondly a company issue. I think the Prime Minister was completely wrong when he said today that it was firstly a matter for the company itself. It is not. It is firstly a matter for the government to ensure a robust safety culture in this country. And it just shows, I believe, more bad leadership by this Prime Minister, more spray and walk away, more light-handed stuff which leads to this sort of result. Mr Speaker, when Pike River Management was advised that a ventilation shaft with a 110-metre ladder was unsuitable as a secondary emergency exit, no checks were in place to ensure that the necessary action would be taken. The Commission noted that during the inquiry, when Department of Labour inspectors were shown examples of safety records, they were visibly dismayed by what they were seeing. If only they had been dismayed 2 years ago. It is unforgivable and totally unacceptable that this could ever have been allowed to occur in this country. The Royal Commission's findings are clear and unequivocal. This has been a systematic failure by government. I repeat, Mr Speaker, by government to ensure workplace safety in New Zealand. The responsibility for what happened at Pike River does not simply rest with field inspectors who acted within legal guidelines and standards set in place by regulators. The responsibility ultimately rests with the government itself. It rests with the Department of Labour. It rests with the Minister, who, to her credit, has resigned. It rests with the Cabinet. It certainly rests with the Prime Minister, who has been so visible immediately after the events of Pike River. And to Chris Finlayson, I would say simply this: too little, too late. The right course of action was for the Minister to resign, and New Zealand First praises Mrs Wilkinson for that decision. But she is the fall guy for an inept government, now trying to squirm out of its responsibilities. This government, I believe, stands indicted in the court of public opinion for what is nothing less than its negligence over a lack of a robust safety culture in this country, and that has occurred since 1992, and every government since then also stands indicted. So New Zealand First calls upon the Prime Minister to acknowledge his own culpability and that indeed of the National Party and government as a whole. Since the 1990s, there has been a recurring theme of removing sound regulation for the sake of increased efficiency, so-called, and increased profits. Policymakers have demonstrated an appalling lack of regard for human life and regulatory responsibility for the maintenance of safe standards has been transferred from government departments to businesses themselves. It went far too far. It was really an abdication of responsibility, and, Mr. Speaker, it demonstrably did not work. Now we have seen the worst possible results of this tried and failed government policy. Now is the time for the government to admit its failure, not just to accept the 16 recommendations which Chris Finlayson talked about. That is the very least we can expect. We need much more than that. We need also for the government to give the country an unequivocal assurance that a new, much tougher regulatory regime will be introduced. This, Mr. Speaker, must include, at the very least, a new offence of corporate manslaughter to bring home those who run companies which deal in difficult, dangerous and perhaps industries which require much more regulation to also take responsibility for themselves. And the government must also give the country a similar assurance that the responsible department will get the expert staff and the resources it needs too, and to ensure the rebuilding of a safety culture in New Zealand business, mining in particular, which will drag New Zealand back out of the third world status we have fallen into. And, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to just conclude by saying again that New Zealand First deeply regrets what happened at Pike River, offers again its sympathy to the families of those who lost their lives, and, Mr. Speaker, to do all New Zealand First can to assist this House, this Parliament and the country to bring back a level of safety for industries such as mining, where safety is so important, to bring back a regime which we can all rely upon to ensure that disasters of this kind never happen again.
I call the honourable member Chris Ockenville.
Thank you.